Hello and welcome to this training on preparing for the return to school. I think we've talked a lot over the last few weeks and months about the psychological impact of being on lockdown and being away from all of our friends and some of our family. But now it's time to start thinking about the impact of returning to school, because that's going to be quite a different challenge for some of us, and for some of the children it's going to be no problem. They'll take that in their stride. They will have had a good experience of lockdown. They'll be quite looking forward to coming back to school. But for a lot of children and a lot of staff as well, it's going to be a really difficult time. And this training here is just to prepare you to think about what the psychological impact of lockdown might have been, and to think about the small practical steps that we can take to hopefully make things a little bit easier for all of the children. I just wanted to start with this quote to kind of set the tone for the whole of this training really, and the emphasis going forwards, which is thinking about the children's well-being and putting that above everything else really over the next few months. So people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think for a lot of the children, this is going to be the lasting thing that they remember of going back to school. How did it feel going back to school? And what did we do to make them feel safe and to make them feel comfortable, and to make it a fun and enjoyable time for them. And one of the first things I wanted to highlight, regardless of the experience that the young people have had while they've been in lockdown, this is probably, these pictures, if you just Google schools and children, it's full of pictures like this. And this is probably the kind of image that children have in their head, remembering about school and what school looked like, sitting together on the carpet, having classes where they've sat on a desk next to their friends, working together in groups, sitting together to have their meals. This is what they think about when they think about school and what school was like. But in actual fact, school is going to look a lot more like this. So these are the pictures that have been taken from places where they've already gone back to school. So Denmark, some parts of Germany. And when you look at these, it's so different. The children obviously having to queue really far apart, having to eat really far apart, at school desks while they're eating, at classes of quite small numbers, very limited group work and discussions. So things are going to look really different. And I think my first thing to say is that we need to be prepared for that. And the fact that it's going to feel quite different and could feel quite stark and hostile unless we're very careful. And also, they need to be prepared for that as well. So that's one of the things in when we talk about the actions. Is one of the things is really preparing them for what it's going to look like and why it's going to look like that and why those measures are being taken. And I think in the midst of all this is a really important phrase to keep in mind. So rather than thinking about social distancing, thinking about physical distancing rather than social distancing, and staying physically distant but emotionally close, because otherwise it's going to feel like quite a scary place for a lot of those children to come back to. So as I said before, you're going to have some children that come back and they are absolutely fine. They might find the situation a bit strange at first, but they're going to adapt really well. And hopefully that will be the majority of children. But you will have some children who find it a lot more difficult. And generally, when we think about resilience, which is the ability to kind of bounce back, we can think about that in terms of weighing up the child's protective factors, so the factors that they have that really protect them and allow them to respond with resilience, against the risk factors, which is all the adversity. And obviously a global pandemic is a fairly massive adversity. So when we think about those protective factors, it's things like having warm, supportive parenting, having good coping skills, feeling safe in your home environment, having quite positive experiences, keeping in contact with those around you and having a sense of belonging. All of those things are going to really help you. And there's a really useful framework for thinking about risk and resilience, and that is something called the Interactive Resilience Framework, which was developed by Young Minds and Boing Boing, who are a resilience charity. And it looks a bit complicated when you first look at it, but if you just look at those 5 columns, it just gives you lots of evidence-based factors which we know help to support children in responding in a resilient way. So if we have a look down the basics column, so it's things like feeling safe, having good enough housing, having a healthy diet, exercise and fresh air, having enough sleep, all of those are so important for allowing children to respond in a resilient way. And then you've got belonging, so feeling like you belong, learning and feeling like you're going forward, being able to cope, and then just your core self, so your self-image and how you feel about yourself. I've done another version of this slide and I've highlighted all of the factors in here that actually are going to have been diminished and reduced since lockdown. So for some children, having enough money to live, obviously there's been massive financial impact on some people of this pandemic. Being safe or feeling safe. A lot of people aren't feeling safe at the minute, and a statistic that I'll talk to you a little bit later about is that 1/5 of children currently don't feel safe enough to leave their own homes. So there are a lot of children who might actually feel safe in the bubble of their own home, but then the thought of coming back to school is absolutely terrifying, because currently they're afraid to leave their home and they've been told that if they go near anybody else, then there's a threat to their life. So feeling safe is something that a lot of them aren't going to have that luxury at the moment. Exercise and fresh air, again, that's been reduced for everybody, hasn't it? When you think how much time children usually spend outside exercising and in the fresh air and playing, and that just won't have happened as much. Keeping relationships going. Some children will have kept those relationships going. They'll have really good supportive relationships at home. They'll feel really well bonded to their parents. They'll feel like they've got a kind of safe bubble at home with their family, and they would have kept connected through all of these technologies, which we're all having to get our heads around. They would have felt quite well connected to the outside world as well. But there will be children, especially those who haven't got access to the technologies, that will feel really out of that loop. And for some as well, the main place, if you look at the top line of the second column, find somewhere with a child or young person to belong. For a lot of children, that place to belong is school. That place that is the one place that has always been consistent and predictable and constant suddenly shut down and left them. And then we're coming back, we're starting again, but there's no guarantee that we'll be staying open. So suddenly that safe, stable, consistent place for them where they belong has just gone. And they don't know when it's going to reopen, and they don't know when if it's going to stay open, and then they're going to have the summer holidays and then another transition after that. So there's going to be a lot of instability in some children's lives, and where school has been the stable thing, that's going to have a massive impact on them. If we have a look down at the other columns, so coping, for some children, calming down and self-soothing, they'll really struggle with that, and that's a skill that needs to be taught. And we know that as soon as children don't feel safe, they're much more likely to go into that fight or flight response. And when we bring them back into the school environment, that's quite likely as well, that they'll be in a classroom and a child coughs, and what would have initially last year been something they wouldn't have even registered suddenly could kind of start a fight or flight response in a lot of children. So we just need to be aware of that. So obviously thinking about what the impact of this will have been on young children and children is really difficult, because this is really unprecedented. There has been one piece of previous research, which was in 2013, where somebody did some research looking at the experiences of young people being in quarantine or isolation during the H1N1 and SARS. And what they found was that a third of those children actually experienced trauma symptoms. 1 in 20 experienced post-traumatic stress disorder. So it has a massive impact on people, when you make people feel that they're not safe, and you take them away from their sort of webs of relationships, it has a really big impact. So that's something that we have to go on. Obviously, I think with this situation, it might be slightly lessened, because the fact that with this everybody is in the same boat globally is going to have a bit of a boosting factor in terms of people's resilience, because it's going to mean that people feel that we're all in this together. So hopefully the impact won't be as much as it was on those poor children. But that is all we have to go on at the minute, so we do have to bear that in mind. because there hasn't been a lot of research done, there are some companies and organisations who are doing research now and kind of updating their results and sharing their results as they go along, to help us to get an idea. So Young Minds are one of those people. They've done a survey of people. It was 2,000 people who they know had suffered with a history of mental health issues. And what they found was, when they surveyed them, 83% of those young people felt that their mental health issue had got worse since lockdown. 83%, that's massive. They've also found that self-harm has increased, and because obviously people have more time to think about self-harming, and also greater opportunities to do it when they're at home. There's also something called the Co-Space study, which you may have heard of, which was started by the University of Oxford, looking into the experiences of children and their families whilst in lockdown. And they're the ones who found that a fifth of children are currently too afraid to leave their own homes. They also had that does mean that 4/5 of children aren't too afraid to leave their home, if we put a bit of a spin on it. And they've also looked at children who are staying connected, and the vast majority of children are staying connected through new technologies and things. They're really well placed to be doing that. We often worry about how much time they spend on social media and how much time they spend looking at screens, but actually that's going to be a big protective factor for them in this current situation. So that's a positive. We also know from other areas of research in psychology that prolonged stress and loneliness are factors for anxiety and depression in later life. So we do have a fairly good idea that actually this lockdown is probably going to result in some issues that we need to be prepared for. And I think this quote puts it really well. This is from Barry Carpenter, who's the Professor of Mental Health in Education at Oxford Brookes. And he said, those 5 losses of routine, structure, friendship, opportunity and freedom can trigger the emergence emotionally of anxiety, trauma and bereavement in any child. And that's any child, even children who haven't necessarily had an awful experience in lockdown, and they haven't lost family members. It's still going to be a really, really traumatic experience for some, of that feeling of not feeling safe. So we need to be prepared for that, and this is why really we need to have what's called a trauma-informed approach, which I'll take you through next. So in essence, all a trauma-informed approach is just recognising that the impact of stress and adversity will have on children, and responding with acceptance, validation and empathy. So it's nothing new to learn. It's just a different way of prioritising our approach really, and prioritising the fact that we need to be recognising that impact that it will have had on children, looking out for that in children, knowing what to look for and looking out for it, and then just accepting it, and empathising with them, because you may see some children showing behaviour that they may have not shown before, and it's about thinking, okay, what is this child trying to tell me through their behaviour? How are they feeling that's meaning that they're behaving in this way, and what can I do to support them and to empathise and to help them to show that emotion in a bit of a different way. And we really need to remember that before we can learn, we need to feel safe, we need to feel regulated, and we need to feel connected, which is where this model that I'll talk you through next can come in really, really handy. So this slide shows us something called the neurosequential model, which was developed by Bruce Perry, who's one of the leading neuroscientists in this area, and he just looked at the brain and what happens in the brain when we feel stressed. And basically, if we think about this triangle, so he said, before you can reason, before you can learn, so that part at the top of the triangle, you have to do 2 things. First of all, you have to be regulated, so you have to be calm, you have to feel related, you have to feel connected and attuned to somebody, and then you can start to reason. And this part, it all kind of relates to different parts of the brain. So this part at the bottom is supposed to be the brainstem, which is where our kind of fight or flight stress response comes from. Then we've got the limbic brain here, which is the emotional part of the brain. And then finally, this is meant to kind of show the cortex. And my drawing kind of looks a little bit like a brain, but this bottom part here, this is where the fight or flight response comes from. And the problem with the fight or flight response is that when we go into fight or flight and when we're feeling very anxious, it kind of shuts off the reasoning part of our brain and the connected part of our brain. We very much go into survival mode, and that's a bit of a problem when we're trying to learn, because if somebody's in panic mode because somebody in the classroom has coughed and they don't feel safe because suddenly they're out of their bubble and they're with lots of people when they've been told that people are unsafe, then they're not going to feel regulated. And then if we start to try and teach them all about something quite challenging, then there's really no point, because they're really not going to feel in a place where they can do that. And I'm sure we've all had that experience where we've been in a bit of a panic, maybe in a job interview or an exam, and it feels like your mind's gone blank and you can't really think of what you wanted to think about. And that's because that top part of the brain just doesn't work very well if we're not feeling regulated, if we're not feeling calm. So the things that we need to think about, this model I think is really helpful way to help us to think about it. And I think it's something that we all know anyway. As people who work with children, it's part of your instincts to know that actually we need to help them to be calm, and we need to relate to them, we need to connect with them and help them to get that sense of belonging back. They're the two things that are going to be really important in the first couple of weeks before we really start to challenge them and take them forward with their learning. This diagram again comes from the work of Bruce Perry, and he suggested that when we have a stressor, we have kind of two different ways of dealing with that stressor, or two different ways of seeing it. For some people, if we look at the left, the pink side, for some people they will experience stress as very unpredictable. They'll feel that it's very extreme, and if it's prolonged, then that can really lead to sensitization and vulnerability to stress. And the thing is that a change, so going back to school, a change is a stressor for anybody. For some people, that additional stressor, they'll be able to take it in their stride. And for other people, that's just going to feel like another change feels very difficult when you're already in a state of extreme stress. The other side is a different pattern of stress. This is for people who've experienced stress as something that's quite predictable. They feel quite in control of the situation. They feel that the stress is quite moderate. And if you feel that way, then your tolerance is going to be higher of that stress and you're going to feel more resilient. So I think most of us are probably somewhere in the middle between the sensitization and tolerance boxes there. But what we can take from this, and I think what is really important that we take from this, is that the more predictable we make the change and the more predictable we make everything that happens during that transition, and the more controllable we make it, the more tolerant the children are going to be. So we don't want to make lots of changes all at once. We want to make it very predictable, give them lots of pre-warnings about what it's going to look like, what it's going to feel like, give them control over how that's going to be, maybe give them choices over certain things that they can have choices over, and allow them to give lots of feedback. That's all going to make them more tolerant. And also that middle box of making the stress feel quite moderate. As teachers and as members of staff, you have a really important job in sort of spreading what's called emotional contagion. So we all know, don't we, that when you're around somebody who's feeling really stressed, it's quite contagious, and then you end up feeling quite stressed as well. And in the same way, if you're around someone that's really happy and really smiley, it makes you feel that way, because we have mirror neurons, and we naturally attune to the people around us and sort of feel the same way. So you have a really important job as kind of super spreaders of that emotional contagion, trying to spread warmth, calm, positive thought, to try and sort of contain those children who are feeling that the stress is very, very extreme. Research into the recovery after serious incidents tells us that there are 5 things that are really important to enhance recovery and help with that transition. The first thing is providing a sense of safety for the children and for you as well. And because feeling safe, and for you to feel safe and make the children feel safe, you need to feel safe first. So providing a sense of safety, and that's going to be quite a challenge in schools, because we're being encouraged to try to help the children to social distance, which sends the message really that they aren't safe. So it's going to be quite a challenge for us to help them to, although they feel physically distant from each other, to feel emotionally close and emotionally safe. A sense of calm is the second thing that we need to promote to help recovery. There's a lot about trying to sort of help people to feel positive and to stay positive, which is great. And that is you do need to kind of send that emotional contagion of positivity and safety and calm. However, we also need to recognise and accept that a lot of children won't feel calm. And they will have negative emotions, and we need to recognise those emotions and validate those emotions as well, because it's totally normal. We just need to normalise them to help them to feel that there's not something wrong with them, that they don't feel positive and calm in this situation, because it's totally normal and understandable. And the third one is to try and promote a sense of self and collective efficacy. So what this means is it's again drawing back to the research of Dr. Perry. Staff and pupils need to feel a sense of control in their lives and to believe that their actions are likely to lead to generally positive outcomes. They need to feel that they belong to a group that's also likely to experience positive outcomes, and that's known as collective efficacy. So it's part of the psychology really behind people needing to sort of feel like they're doing something and helping in some way. It is all part of that. Because it generally gives us a sense of purpose as well, which we sort of need at this point. A sense of connectedness, so we need to feel connected to each other. A lot of children will have sort of lost some of their relationships, and they will have lost some of their relationships and closeness that they maybe felt to members of staff as well. So all of those things need to be re-established, and we're going to talk about ways that that can be done. And also, as staff, it's important that you feel connected to your community as well, because that you won't have seen any of your colleagues for so long. So it's really important to get those connections back and to feel a sense of belonging within that community and feel connected to your colleagues. And finally, promoting hope is really important in recovery from situations that have been difficult. And there's something called adversarial growth that we really need to harness in this situation. And adversarial growth just means how have you grown during periods of adversity? And we can see, can't we, there are so many positives actually in society to what's happened. And it's about noticing, how are things different now in maybe a positive way? How have I grown, and how am I different now than maybe I was before in a good way? How did I cope with this situation? What kindness have other people shown to me, and what kindness have I shown to others, and how did that feel? What things am I really, really grateful for? And how did we cope as a community? How did we come together? All of those things are going to be really important to talk about and to reflect upon, to help children to feel positive and to feel a sense of hope. So now I'm going to take you through each one of those 5 principles that we talked about on the last slide. I'm going to take you through some practical ways and some considerations really to think about in terms of how you can implement those in schools. I'm going to keep them as, they're going to be quite vague, because I know that actually I'm only thinking about the psychological well-being aspect here, whereas you've got so many other things to think about in terms of what's practical, and about the difference of the children and the mixes that you have in your class. And also, we don't know what any of this is going to really look like yet. So these are just some general principles to consider when you're thinking about how you're going to help these children to come back. So starting with number 1, helping children and young people to feel safe. So the first thing, going back to what we were saying about keeping things controllable and predictable, have a consistent, predictable routine. Try and keep it the same every day if you can. Have a really clear structure for your lessons or for your day. Try and present that visually wherever possible, and try and give that to children and parents before they even come back. So they know what things are going to look like. They know what that routine is going to be, because that will really help them. If they've been kind of pre-warned and they know what it's going to be like, they'll feel that that is going to be predictable. So keep things as predictable as you can. Transitions, just be aware, as I said before, that there is going to be a reduced capacity to cope with change. So we just need to be aware of that. And even in kind of transitions between lessons, transitions during lessons, transitions throughout the day, just try and reduce any unnecessary transitions for a start. and give lots of warning before transition. So give that verbally through kind of countdowns. Right, we've only got 15 minutes left of this lesson. We've only got 10 minutes. We've only got 5 minutes. Maybe include, have a consistent routine where you use music to signal those kind of transitions, maybe dimming the lighting, those kind of things, just to really give them a pre-warning, to make everything very predictable and very smooth, and just give them time to adapt, because too many changes within one situation it's just too many stressors on top of an already kind of high baseline of stress. So we just need to be really aware of that and keep children within their window of tolerance. Support for vulnerable pupils. There will be some children, particularly those who maybe are on the autistic spectrum or have speech and language difficulties, who have SEN of any kind, vulnerable children that have experienced not such a good experience where they've been in lockdown and not felt as safe in lockdown. They're going to find things a lot more difficult. And so some extra things that you could put in place for them, things like social stories, for instance, to help young children to understand why we're asking them to wash their hands so many times, and why we're telling them to stay 2 meters away from other people, and why everybody's really spread far apart. They might just need that extra explanation. And also, when we think about the vulnerable pupils, we need to think about those children who've been in school this whole time. That has become their safe bubble, where there's only a couple of children there and they're quite spaced quite far apart from them, and that has begun to feel like a safe place. And then suddenly we're introducing all of these extra children into their safe place. We need to really think about how we can support them to feel safe through all of this. And when we think about that, making it controllable, maybe thinking about involving those vulnerable pupils in saying, what is going to make you feel safe in this situation, and how can we make everybody else feel safe, and giving them a part in that feedback and in that planning will hopefully help them to feel more in control, and then make it a bit easier for them. Safe space. So create a safe space somewhere where, you know, if some children are in your class and they are in fight or flight, because it all just is quite a lot to manage, of being in a confined space with lots of other people and they're just really not coping, make sure you've got a safe space. Make sure they're really aware of that actually, if you're not feeling safe and you need to go and step outside into this particular area, or you need to go and sit in this quiet place for a little while, then that is absolutely fine. And just make sure they're aware where that is, how they can get there, preferably use a system where they can show you a card, or they know that they can just go to that place without having to give you an explanation of how they're feeling. Then that's going to be really useful. And also, I think for staff, you're going to need that safe place as well. So have a think to yourself, okay, if I am feeling that it's all getting a bit too much, where can I go where I can just have a breather, and start to feel a bit better, and what can I do in that time to help myself to calm back down and become more regulated, so that you can feel more able to then relate and reason, to go back to that diagram before. Next one, be curious, not furious. Excuse the cheesiness of that, but I think it just makes it a bit more memorable. So just trying to remember that actually, yeah, the behaviour, some children will show how they're feeling through their behaviour, and just to remember that let's try and think, why are they showing that behaviour, and what can I do to support them with their feelings, to help them to show that behaviour in a different way. So that's where things like emotion coaching can come in really handy. It's a really good approach for situations like that. Prepare and pre-warn. So as we said, the classrooms and the schools, everything's going to look quite different. So wherever you can, prepare the children, pre-warn them. If you can, maybe think about sending things home that are quite visual. So if the classroom is going to look really different to how it did before, think about taking pictures, little virtual tour, and emailing that to them, so that they know what they're coming into. If there are measures that you've put in, if there's signs around, send those before as well, so that they know what they're coming into, and they feel prepared. So when they walk in and they see that everything looks very different, it's not an additional stressor, it's something they've already prepared themselves for. And then finally, separation anxiety, especially for those younger children. The separation anxiety, they might find that even harder than perhaps they did before, because they've been with their families in that safe place for such a long time. To then have to come away from them into a situation that feels quite strange and unsafe is going to be really difficult. So we just need to be really ready for that. Offer comfort and compassion rather than trying to sort of distract children away from their parents. Actually validate those emotions with that child, and allow that child to feel that emotion, and kind of say to them, I know this is really hard, but I'm going to do what I can to keep you safe in this situation until mummy comes back. Using things like The Invisible String is a book that you can use for helping children to cope with their separation anxiety, of feeling that actually, even though that person is away from me, there's an invisible string that bonds us together. Things like that can be quite helpful. Drawing a little heart on their hand, and drawing a heart on their mum's hand can help, so that they can always think that that person is still there as well. So I know that reception teachers and year one teachers will have loads of brilliant strategies for coping with separation anxiety, but it might be that you see that separation anxiety coming up through the school and even up into secondary school. So using that resource that you have of those reception and year one teachers to share some of their expertise is going to be really helpful. Right, number 2, helping children and young people to feel calm. The first part, before really you can help them to feel calm, because of what we were talking about with emotional contagion, you need to make sure that you feel calm as well, and that's going to be quite difficult. Ideally, it will be great if you can have a day before even the children come back to school to sort of acclimatise and to feel safe yourselves, and that's going to be something that will be really beneficial, hopefully, if that's something that that is able to happen. But either way, you need to really look after yourselves and think about some self-care. I don't want to go into it too much here because, you know, we've got a lot to talk about. But if you go to the Anna Freud website, which is a brilliant website for so many resources in terms of mental health and children's mental health, they've got a whole web page on self-care, and it has just lots and lots of suggestions of things that you can do to look after yourselves. Have a little look through those and think about which ones are the ones that really help you, so that you can know yourself, know what kind of things are going to help you beforehand, and when you're at school to feel safe and to feel calm, so that you can then be in a position to contain those emotions that the children might feel when they then come in. Second one, monitor. Some children are going to show you through their behaviour, and they might be quite expressive with how they're feeling. Other children will be less so, and they won't be able to necessarily tell you or show you how they're feeling. So it's really important to monitor how they are, so that we can help to intervene and make sure that they are going in the right direction. So a really simple way, because obviously we don't want to add to anybody's workload here, is just at the beginning of the day, just get them to rate from 1 to 10 on a little scale. How are you feeling today about being in school? You might do it at the end of the day. Pick a point in the day, get them to rate how they're feeling, and who would be, and get them to say one person in school who they would talk to if they weren't feeling great and were feeling like they couldn't cope. So then we can monitor, okay, how are they feeling, and do they have somebody that they can turn to? And it doesn't matter who that person is. You don't have to be any kind of therapist or an ELSA necessarily to be able to support the children with what they need. It needs to be somebody that they feel safe with, because at the end of the day, this isn't necessarily a situation where people need therapy. This is a situation that is very normal to feel, you know, a bit stressed about. So the important thing is having somebody that they feel that they could just go and speak to and say, oh, I'm really not feeling like I'm coping very well, and just somebody to empathise and validate and accept how they're feeling. That's what's important in really kind of small doses. So please don't feel disempowered and diskilled and feel like you haven't got what you need to be able to cope with children's emotions, because you absolutely do. You don't have to be a therapist to be therapeutic, and the best thing in these situations is just really short frequent conversations with children of saying, oh, how are you feeling, and just showing them that they feel that they're cared about, showing them that you're keeping them in mind, giving them an opportunity to express how they're feeling. That's what's really important. And hopefully what you should see is, as you monitor, that the children are starting to feel better over a period of time, and that they do feel that they have somebody to talk to, because that's the most important thing. And obviously over time, if they're not feeling any better, then that's the time probably to refer them on and help them to have somebody that they can speak to frequently, who can use some extra resources with them, and has a few extra tools in their toolkit to deal with those kind of emotions. But actually you're really well placed to do this, because you're someone that they have a relationship with already. So just monitor how they're feeling and be there for them. Create frequent opportunities to express their emotions. So if you can, have some time during your lessons or during the day when they can do some extra well-being activities. And at the moment we're in the process of collating all of those. The ELSAs are working really hard to put all of those resources together into a resource bank for you, so you've got lots of things to draw on and use. Going back up to the top row, the right hand side box, focus upon what they have learned rather than what they haven't. There are going to be huge gaps, we know that, but what's really important is they aren't coming into school and straight away being tested to see where everybody is, because that is going to put so much stress on them. And at the minute, we do not want to be putting stress on them. We want them to feel regulated, we want them to feel related. So don't straight away test them. Focus on what they have learned, give them opportunities to talk about how their lockdown experience was and what things they did and what things they learned. It might be nothing to do with the curriculum, but it might be that they cared for somebody, or that they learned how to bake, or that they went out in nature and learned lots about the animals and the surrounding area around their home, and that's got real value as well. So focus on what they have learned rather than what they haven't to start off with. And keep them all together rather than splitting them off into little groups and making them feel that they're part of a group that maybe hasn't learned as much as another group. So just keep them all together and help them to feel related. Self-regulation activities. So we talk about that bottom part of the brain, that fight or flight point, and actually you can't reason with somebody when they're feeling panic. They need to start feeling regulated. And how do we do that? So there are lots of self-regulation activities that you can use. So the kind of things that would be helpful are anything that includes any kind of rhythm. So things like breathing exercises, and there are the breathing exercises that I'll talk you through in a minute when we talk about teaching relaxation. But anything like breathing, walking, rhythmical things like music, bouncing a ball up and down, running, rocking, swinging, jumping, all of those things are very regulating activities. They're ones that you don't have to be able to relate with anybody, that you don't have to be able to reason. So it is really working at that very bottom level of your brain, and that's why those things work. If you can use something called relational regulation, which is where you do those kind of activities with somebody else, so doing those kind of things as a class, that's going to be even more powerful, because that allows them to regulate and relate. So they're going to be more able to then reason. The key thing to remember with those things, I mean, there's so many opportunities to put those kind of things in, and secondary age children will have that opportunity to self-regulate between every lesson anyway. But just remember that 1 hour of PE or exercise in the day isn't really enough to help those children to then feel regulated for the rest of the day. It sort of needs to be short, frequent bursts are going to be much more effective. So try and think about how you could put those in during the day and during your lessons to help those children to feel a bit calmer. So teaching relaxation strategies, a lot of children, you might say to them, right, calm down, but actually they don't know how to calm down. So we need to teach those relaxation strategies. Things that can be really helpful are, breathing. Breathing is the best way to get people out of fight or flight and to calm back down. And there are lots of ways of teaching breathing. So things like 7-11 breathing, where you breathe in through your nose for 7 seconds and then breathe out for 11 seconds. And if that's repeated, then that can have a really positive effect and helps you to calm down quite quickly. Also, even for really young children, things like just telling them to smell the flowers and then blow out the candles, or blowing bubbles, things like that can all be really helpful for relaxation. And also incorporating mindfulness colouring, or guided meditations. There are so many that are available. There are some really nice Christian specific ones, quite spiritual ones that are really nice. And there are lots of things available for free. So Headspace, for example, you've got Headspace Kids that you can access for free. Create opportunities to express emotion. We've talked about that one. And then finally, remember the power of your voice. So often when we're trying to calm children down who are feeling dysregulated and feeling really upset, our first instinct is to get close to them and maybe to touch them. It's just human instinct, isn't it? You want to get close and you want to look after them. Obviously, we can't do that at the minute, and that's going to feel really, really hard, especially with those young children, to stay 2 meters away from them and try and calm them down when they're feeling anxious or feeling upset. But just remember the power of your voice. So research shows that actually your voice is just as powerful as sort of proximity and touch in helping people to calm down. And someone called Dan Hughes, he talked about something called loud empathy, which is a strategy where you use slow, audible breaths just help to calm somebody down. So just breathing quite loudly so they can hear you, helping them to calm down. And also using kind of a storytelling tone of voice to really help them to calm down is particularly effective. So just don't forget your voice can be really powerful. Okay, on to the next one. So self and collective efficacy is really about helping people to regain a sense of control and a sense of purpose. It can be quite helpful to reflect on coping. So rather than looking at kind of what's wrong and how people are feeling that's negative, focusing on instead of okay, all the problems that they've had and all the difficulties that they're experiencing, focusing on okay, how did you manage to cope with all of that? Because that sounds really difficult. And what is it about you that gave you that strength to be able to cope with all of that? So giving them opportunities to focus on what's strong with them rather than what's wrong with them, to give you another cheesy line. Set goals with them to again give them a sense of purpose. Nothing that's going to be too challenging in terms of the learning and thinking part of the brain, but just goals that they can do to feel that they've had a bit of a sense of achievement throughout the day and a sense of purpose. Ask for their feedback. So ask them regularly, how is this feeling for you? How is school feeling? Is there anything that we can do that's going to make this feel safer and calmer and a more enjoyable experience for you? Because that will really help them to feel that they're in control and that they've got some self-efficacy where they're having an impact on their environment. Giving them responsibilities is going to help with their self-efficacy as well. And then finally, I talked a little bit about this before, but gaining a sense of control through doing. A lot of us, I think, through all of this have probably felt quite powerless. But if you can feel like you're doing something to help others, then that can really help with that. And we've seen that all through society, people doing amazing things to help everybody else. And we can harness that in the classroom as well. It may be that that you use that to try and think about what can we do to help others still within this situation, helping the NHS or raising money or doing something for charity could be a really good way to help them to feel a sense of purpose and control well in that first few weeks while they're back. Right, so promoting a sense of connectedness and building those relationships and that sense of belonging back up is really going to help those children to respond in a resilient way. So first thing to think about before the children even come back, things that are going to help them to reconnect with you again. So sending them a welcome message, if it's children that if you've got a whole new teacher because the teacher's still off, then thinking about how you can introduce yourself to those children to hopefully start to build that connection. You can send virtual welcome messages, send photos, take time to listen and understand the experiences of each one of those children in their lockdown experience. So increase any opportunities for connection and give them a chance to really connect with you through those short conversations that I talked about before. Promote kindness, understanding and gratitude. It would be great if there can be increased opportunities for reflections, for circle times, to promote kindness between the people within your class as well, so that you can start to build the relationships and that web of relationships around them. Because what research shows is that the more good quality relationships we have, the more that's going to help our resilience. Having a relational approach to behaviour. So rather than using kind of punishments again, focusing on those ways of where you can still build relationships through managing their behaviour. So still having boundaries, but really trying to understand where that behaviour is coming from and support the child rather than just punishing them is going to be really good. Restorative approaches, emotion coaching are all the kind of things to be thinking about there if you can. And key adults. So some children will be really struggling with coming back, especially those children who were vulnerable before, who have maybe not felt safe during lockdown, those children who maybe struggled to attend school because of anxiety before or had previous mental health issues. It might be really good to incorporate a key adult approach for those children so that they can start to build relationships again and build trust with and rapport with one adult before they start to kind of build trust with other people. So they might need that to be able to build those feelings of safety first and feel supported through that transition period. So just have a think about those things. And finally, on to promoting hope. So what have we learned from this? What have you learned about yourself, and how have we changed for the better? How has the world changed for the better? How did we cope? How did we pull together as a community? What things are you grateful for? What things are you looking forward to in the future? Because when we come back, things aren't going to be normal yet. There are going to be things that that we still aren't able to do. It's not going to be quite the full picture of normal school. So what things are you still looking forward to being able to do? Because promoting that hope is going to be really important for facilitating the recovery. And the final thing, in terms of thinking about hope, is thinking about these new beginnings. Rather than thinking about school as in we're coming back and things are going to be different and things are going to be worse, thinking about, okay, what opportunities do we have now that we didn't before? How can we think really creatively and make the return to school feel quite safe and fun? And I think looking at what some of the other countries have done, like Denmark and Germany and China, can be quite inspiring. And I know as teachers and as members of school staff, you have so many ideas for ways that we could do this. But looking at the pictures of children learning outside in outdoor classrooms, and that will feel like a real novelty. And it also might help children to feel safe. It's going to make social distancing easier. In Denmark, some children have created a whole new game called Shadow Tag, where they have to tag each other's shadows rather than getting close and tagging each other. In China, some of the children have been creating these social distancing hats, which I think is quite nice for the younger children, rather than having to constantly remind them, stay away from this person, stay away from that person, don't get close to each other. They've come up with this really fun way of saying to children, don't let your hats touch each other, because that's your own space, and getting them to create their own hats and have them how they want them. Again, it gives them that sense of control and fun. So there are lots of things I'm sure that you can think of that hopefully are going to create something that makes the children want to come back to school, and makes this, what might feel like a risk for some of them, will really make that risk worthwhile. And finally, and most importantly, we spend a lot of time thinking about the children and thinking about what's going to keep them safe, but actually you really need to think about looking after yourself as well. So just some pointers here, and some of these we've talked about already, but self-care, knowing what it is that helps you to feel a bit better and a bit safer and calmer. So that website, the Anna Freud website, is really worth a look, whether it's something like mindfulness, reading a book, doing some exercise, talking to somebody, just knowing what it is that makes you feel calm and doing lots of that. Giving yourself time to acclimatise. So we've talked about pre-warning the children about what things are going to look like, and how things are going to feel, but it's really important that you have some time to acclimatise to how it's going to feel for you and how those things are going to look. So thinking about how you're going to make your classroom look and feel safe is going to be important, and having a bit of time to do that before the children come. Give yourself an opportunity to reflect on how you feel about the return to school. So rather than just going into autopilot and thinking, right, this is what I have to do, just give yourself a bit of a chance, a bit of space to think about the things that you're looking forward to, the things that are going to be really nice about coming back to school, and also the things that maybe you don't feel so good about, and that you are a bit concerned about. And make sure that you communicate those worries to somebody so that they can put in actions that are going to make you feel like you've got some self-efficacy and you've got some control, because that's important for you as well. Find your calm, as we talked about before, trying to find your calm so that you can then be that calm oasis for the children. And finally, connecting with others. So in those first few weeks, it's really important, even though things are going to be super busy, try and make some time to go to the staff room and to build those connections back up with the people, your colleagues and the people around you, so that you can feel good, and to start to recover as well, because that's really, really important. So that brings us to the end of this training. I hope that it hasn't felt overwhelming, and that it's just given you a way of sort of thinking about the return to school in a way that feels a bit more within your control, and that you feel a bit reassured that you have within you what you need to be able to support the emotional needs of those children, because really it is just going to be about getting those relationships back on track, and that's going to be the best thing that you have to be able to support those children. There are some really useful resources to have a look at. I've talked lots about the Anna Freud Centre, but the link's there for self-care. But if you just Google self-care at Anna Freud Centre, you'll be able to find that page. National Autistic Society have lots of social stories and visuals that they've already made that you can download and use. So there are lots of posters that encourage children to wash their hands, for example, and explain why we need to wash our hands really frequently. Social stories about the return to school and about staying safe and why we need to keep far away from each other. Those kind of things are going to be helpful for all children, really, not just those children who have autism. So I'd really encourage you to have a look at them and to use them. If you don't have visual timetables in your classroom, then using things like the National Autistic Society or STARS team, which is the one below, or even Twinkle, given that's free at the minute. There are so many really good visual timetables on there. And if you don't have one in your classroom already, that's going to really support the children to know, to have that big picture of what's going on and make things more predictable and make those transitions more predictable for them throughout their day. ELSA Support is a website that the ELSAs mainly use, which has lots and lots of emotional literacy resources on there. It's a great place to go for anything that you need. But as I said before, the ELSAs are working really hard at the minute to bring all of the resources that they have together. So we've got an absolute treasure trove of resources for you that will be made available before the return to school, so that you can dip in and out of those for any wellbeing activities that you want to do with the children. Mindfulness would be a really good thing if you wanted to incorporate into the day. There are lots of guided meditations already available on YouTube, and then there's also Headspace for Kids, which is brilliant. And then finally, Safe Hands Thinking Minds website is a brilliant place for lots of resources for children's wellbeing and mental health, some of which are specific to coronavirus. So that's a really useful place to look as well. So as I said, I hope this has been really useful, and thank you so much for listening. If you do need any more information, then please feel free to email me anytime. If you don't know already, my email address is a.damario, DAMARIO, @xaviercet.org.uk. So please feel free to contact me anytime if there's anything you need. Thank you.